Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. My name is Laila, and for most of my life, I believed family was the one thing that could never betray you. Friends could drift, lovers could leave, jobs could end, but blood was supposed to be loyal. That belief shaped everything about me. I was the younger sister, the quieter one, the dependable one. My older sister, Samra, was the opposite, bold, beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who walked into a room and pulled every eye toward her without trying. Growing up, I admired her. I copied her hairstyles, borrowed her clothes, defended her whenever anyone criticized her. She was my role model, my protector, my best friend. When I met Ayan, I thought life had finally given me something that was mine alone. He was gentle where Samra was loud, thoughtful where she was impulsive. He listened when I spoke. He noticed small things, like how I liked my tea warm but not hot, or how I got nervous speaking in crowds. We met at a mutual friend's engagement party. I was sitting alone at a table, half hidden behind a floral centerpiece, when he asked if the seat beside me was taken. That simple question began everything. Our relationship grew slowly. No fireworks, no dramatic declarations, just comfort, laughter, shared silences, and long conversations about dreams. When he proposed a year later under the old neem tree in my parents' yard, I cried so hard I could barely say yes. My mother clapped her hands with joy. My father hugged him. And Samra? She shrieked, jumped around me, and promised she would plan the perfect wedding. I should have noticed how tightly she held my hand that night, how long her gaze lingered on Ayan, but I didn't. I was too happy to be suspicious. Wedding planning took over our lives. Samra insisted on helping with everything, the venue, the dresses, the guest list. She said she wanted my day to be perfect. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was my sister. She had always taken the lead in life. I thought this was just another way of showing love. Ayan's family was kind. His parents welcomed me warmly. His older brother, Farid, was quieter than Ayan, more reserved. He lived abroad for work but returned often to visit family. When we met, he shook my hand politely, smiled, and spoke little. But his eyes were observant. He seemed to notice everything while saying very little. As the wedding approached, my days blurred into fabric swatches, guest confirmations, and henna designs. I was exhausted but happy. Ayan and I met less because of the chaos, but we texted often, sweet messages, reassurances, little jokes. I never doubted him. Why would I? He was steady, safe. 2 weeks before the wedding, Samra asked me to come to her apartment. She said she needed help choosing jewelry to match her bridesmaid's dress. I went happily, carrying my laptop and some wedding documents, planning to work while she got ready. When I arrived, her door was unlocked. I called her name. No answer. I stepped inside, thinking she might be in the shower. I walked toward the bedroom to leave my bag. And then I heard laughter. A man's laughter. Ayan's laughter. For a moment, my brain refused to connect the sound to meaning. It was just noise. Then I heard Samra's voice, soft and intimate, saying his name. I froze. My hand rested on the doorframe. My heart beat so loudly I thought it would burst through my chest. My body moved before my mind did. I pushed the door open. They were in bed. My sister, my fiancé, entwined in a moment that was never meant for my eyes. Samra gasped and pulled the sheet up. Ayan scrambled to sit up, his face draining of color. No one spoke. No dramatic confrontation, no screaming, just silence, thick, suffocating. I remember noticing absurd details, a half-empty water glass on the side table, Samra's bracelet on the floor, the sound of a car passing outside. Everything felt painfully sharp, like the world had zoomed in to torture me. I didn't cry, not then. I didn't shout. I didn't even tremble. I simply said, "So this is what you've been busy with." My voice sounded unfamiliar, distant. Samra tried to speak. "Laila, I held up my hand. "Don't." Ayan whispered my name. I looked at him, this man who had promised me forever, who had held my face and told me I was his peace, his safety, his love. I walked out without another word. I drove home in a trance. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. When I reached my parents' house, I went straight to my room, locked the door, and sat on the floor beside my bed. Only then did the tears come. Not loud sobs, quiet ones, the kind that shake your ribs and steal your breath, the kind that come when your heart has no words left. Hours passed. Maybe it was minutes. Time didn't matter. Eventually, there was a soft knock on my door, my mother's voice. "Laila, are you okay, Beta?" I wiped my face, opened the door. She gasped when she saw my swollen eyes. I told her everything, in broken sentences, between tears. Her face hardened in a way I had never seen before. My father was called, my brother, then Samra, then Ayan. The living room turned into a courtroom. Samra cried, Ayan apologized, my parents demanded explanations, my father's voice shook with rage, my mother's disappointment felt sharper than any punishment. But I sat silently, watching, listening. Something inside me had gone still, cold, focused. That night, after everyone left, I lay awake in bed. I thought about forgiving them, starting over, canceling the wedding, running away. Every option passed through my mind. Then I thought of Farid, the quiet brother, the observant one. He had seen Samra and Ayan whispering together at family gatherings. He had noticed the way Samra always found reasons to sit beside Ayan. He had once asked me gently, "Are you happy with my brother?" I had laughed and said, "Of course." I realized then that Farid had probably known something was wrong long before I did, and a new thought entered my mind, slow, dangerous, clear. If they could betray me without guilt, I could rebuild without fear, not in anger, not in chaos, but with purpose. I picked up my phone, scrolled to Farid's contact. My finger hovered over his name. Then I typed one sentence. "Can we meet tomorrow? I need to talk." I hit send, and that was the moment my old life ended and a new plan began. Farid replied to my message within minutes. "Of course, I'm here." I barely slept that night. My mind replayed the scene in Samra's bedroom over and over, like a cruel movie stuck on repeat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, heard their laughter, felt that doorframe under my palm. By morning, I was exhausted but strangely steady. The storm of emotion had burned itself out, leaving behind something hard and sharp. I told my parents I needed some time alone and left the house before they could argue. I drove to a quiet cafe across town, one Farid had suggested. When I walked in, he was already seated by the window, hands folded, expression serious. He stood when he saw me. "Laila." His voice was gentle, no pity, no awkwardness. I sat across from him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of other conversations filled the space between us. Finally, Fareed said, "I'm sorry." The simple words cracked something inside me. Tears threatened, but I swallowed them down. "Did you know?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. I suspected something wasn't right, but I didn't have proof, and I didn't want to accuse my own brother without certainty. I nodded. It made sense. Loyalty, family, the same belief that had blinded me. I walked in on them 2 weeks before my wedding. His jaw tightened. He didn't look surprised, just deeply disappointed. "I don't know what to do," I continued. "Everyone expects me to cancel the wedding, disappear, move on quietly. But I feel like if I just walk away, they win. They get to destroy me and move forward like nothing happened." Fareed looked at me carefully. "What do you want, Laila?" No one had asked me that yet, not my parents, not my friends. Everyone assumed they knew what I should do. But Fareed asked what I wanted. I took a breath. "I want them to understand what they did. I want them to feel it. I want justice." He leaned back slightly, absorbing my words. "Revenge?" I thought about it. Not screaming, not violence, not chaos. Something quiet, something that lasts. Fareed was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You know that if you go down that path, there is no turning back." "I know." He studied my face, perhaps expecting hesitation, but I was calm. The pain had sharpened into clarity. "What do you need from me?" he asked. The question hung in the air. I looked at him, the older brother, the steady one who had always watched quietly while others performed. And a daring thought, one I had barely admitted to myself, came forward. I need someone who understands their world, their family, their expectations. I need someone who can stand beside me when I make my move. Fareed's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what move is that?" I smiled for the first time since everything had happened. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a determined one. "If Samra can steal my fiancé, then I can choose a different groom." Fareed didn't react immediately, but I saw the shift in his posture, the way his hands tightened together. "You're asking me to marry you." "I'm asking if you'd consider it," I replied. "Not out of love, not yet. Out of partnership, out of mutual understanding." He let out a slow breath. "You know how that would affect both our families." "Yes," I said, "that's the point." He looked out the window. Cars passed, people walked by, life continued as if my world hadn't shattered. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you see things clearly," I said, "because you already know what they did was wrong, because if anyone can stand beside me without flinching, it's you." He turned back to me. "And if I say no?" "I'll find another way," I said simply, "but I wanted to ask you first." Fareed smiled slightly, a sad smile. "You're braver than you know." We talked for hours about the consequences, about the backlash, about the emotional toll, about the fact that our marriage would begin as strategy, not romance. There were no illusions between us, no fantasy. By the time we left the cafe, we had an agreement. We would announce our engagement in 3 days. Not quietly, not gently, publicly. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in days, not because the pain was gone, but because I had direction, a plan, a future that was mine again. When I told my parents, they thought I was joking. My mother blinked rapidly. "Fareed? Ayan's brother?" "Yes," I said. My father stood up, pacing. "People will talk. They'll say you're doing this to spite him." "I am," I replied. "And?" My mother held my face. "Do you care for him?" "I respect him," I said, "and right now, respect is more real than the love I thought I had." They didn't understand it first, but they saw the steel in my voice, the steadiness. They realized I wasn't broken anymore. That night, Samra came to my room. She stood at the door like a child caught in wrongdoing. "Laila," she whispered, "please, I never meant it to happen." I looked at her, my sister, my childhood companion, my betrayer. "You didn't trip and fall into his bed." She said, her eyes filled with tears. "I love him." I nodded slowly. "Then I hope he's worth losing a sister." She reached for my hand. I stepped back. "Get out." She left without another word. The next morning, Ayan texted me. "Can we talk?" I replied, "No." 2 days later, Fareed and I stood in his parents' living room. His mother sat stiffly on the sofa. His father frowned in confusion. Ayan hovered near the doorway. Samra sat beside him, gripping his arm. Fareed cleared his throat. "I have something important to say. Laila and I have decided to get married." Silence fell. Ayan's face drained of color. "What?" Samra stood up. "This is a joke." Fareed's voice was calm. "It is not." His mother's eyes widened. "But she was going to marry your brother." I smiled politely. "Plans change." Ayan stepped forward. "Laila, this is madness. You're doing this to hurt me." I met his gaze. "No, Ayan, I'm doing this because I refuse to be humiliated and discarded. You made your choice. I made mine." Samra's voice rose. "You're stealing him from me." I laughed softly. "I'm not stealing anything. You taught me that loyalty is optional. I'm simply applying the lesson." His parents began speaking at once. Confusion, anger, accusations. But Fareed stood beside me like a pillar. "We are adults. This is our decision." We left that house together under a storm of shouting. In the car, Fareed glanced at me. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "Better than okay." For the first time since betrayal shattered my life, I felt powerful, not because I had hurt them, but because I had refused to remain small. But revenge has a way of unfolding slowly, and the true consequences were still to come. News travels fast in families like ours. By the next morning, everyone knew. Aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors, all whispering, speculating, choosing sides. Some said I was strong. Others said I was shameless. A few said I was heartbroken and pretending to be brave. Let them talk. Their opinions didn't live in my skin. Fareed and I agreed to take things step by step. We weren't rushing into a wedding. We were building something strategic, something steady. If we were going to walk into this storm together, we needed trust first. He invited me to his apartment to discuss plans away from our family's noise. It was neat, minimalist, orderly, just like him. We sat at his dining table with tea between us. "We need to be clear with each other," Fareed said. "If we go through with this, people will assume many things. They'll think this is revenge. They'll think we're trying to humiliate Ayan and Samra." I raised an eyebrow. "Are they wrong?" He smiled slightly. "Partly. But if this is going to last, it can't be built only on revenge. Otherwise, when the anger fades, there will be nothing left." His honesty impressed me. "So what do you suggest?" I asked. "We get to know each other," he said, "properly, without masks, without performance. If we find respect, compatibility, maybe even affection, then this marriage becomes more than a statement." I nodded. "And if we don't?" "Then we separate peacefully after the dust settles," he said. "No shame, no war." For the first time, I realized Fareed wasn't using me as a tool. He was offering me partnership with open eyes. That gave me a strange comfort. Over the next few weeks, we spent time together. Simple things: grocery shopping, cooking, long drives, quiet dinners. We talked about childhood memories, failures, regrets, ambitions. I learned he had always felt overshadowed by Ayan, the charming younger brother, the golden child. Farid was the serious one, the responsible one, the one expected to fix problems quietly. I spent my life cleaning up after him, Farid admitted one evening as we washed dishes together. This is the first time I chose something for myself. His words stayed with me. Meanwhile, Samra and Ayan tried everything to pull me back. Messages, calls, apologies, tears, even showing up unannounced at my parents' house. My mother finally told them not to return. One afternoon, Samra cornered me outside a tailor shop. "Please," she begged. "He chose me. He loves me. Let him go." I stared at her. "You're asking me to give you the man who betrayed me?" She sobbed. "I made a mistake." I leaned closer. "So did I. I trusted you." She stepped back like I had slapped her. That night, I realized something important. I wasn't marrying Farid to steal anything from Samra. I was choosing a path where I was no longer the victim of their choices. That was the true revenge, reclaiming my agency. 3 months later, Farid proposed. Not under a neem tree, not with rose petals and music, just in his living room, handing me a simple ring. "Laila," he said, "whatever this started as, I've come to admire you, respect you, care for you. If you're willing, I'd like this to be real." I didn't answer immediately. I searched my own heart. Was I still angry? Yes. But was I also finding peace beside this quiet, steady man? Also, yes. "I'll marry you," I said. This time, my parents smiled, not with excitement, but with relief. They'd seen me rebuild, seen me rise. The wedding was small, intimate, no grand stage, no dramatic music, just close family and a few trusted friends. Samra and Ayan were not invited. But on the morning of my wedding, I received a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations. I hope one day you forgive me." No name, but I knew it was Samra. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. Some wounds don't need reopening. The ceremony was simple. Farid and I exchanged vows we had written ourselves, honest ones, promising respect, partnership, honesty. No grand illusions, just real. When he held my hand and said, "I choose you," something warm settled in my chest. Not fireworks, not obsession, something deeper, something safe. After the wedding, life slowly found a rhythm. Farid traveled often for work, but we stayed connected. I returned to my career. We built routines, shared responsibilities, made space for each other. And one evening, about a year later, Farid received a call. Ayan. His voice carried through the room, tense and shaky. Farid listened, said little, then hung up. "What happened?" I asked. Farid looked at me. "They broke up," he said. "Samra left him. She found someone else." For a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Karma had a way of completing circles. But what surprised me was what came next. Ayan showed up at our door the following week. He looked thinner, tired, defeated. He stood there like a ghost from a life I no longer lived. "Laila," he said softly, "I made the biggest mistake of my life." I studied him, the man I once loved, the man who had shattered me, and I realized I felt nothing. No longing, no hatred, just distance. "I wish you healing," I said, but my life moved on. He looked at Farid, shame in his eyes. Farid didn't gloat, didn't boast, just said, "Take care of yourself, brother." When the door closed, I leaned against it and laughed quietly. Not mockery, relief. The storm had passed. I had survived. But the final test was yet to come. Months passed after Ayan's visit. Life became something I once thought impossible, peaceful. Fareed and I settled into a rhythm that felt natural. We learned each other's habits, moods, quiet needs. He liked his coffee black and strong in the morning. I liked mine with milk and a touch of sugar. He woke early, I stayed up late reading. We met in the middle, every day, without force. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker, Fareed said, "Do you ever regret how this began?" I thought about it. The betrayal, the pain, the calculated steps that followed. "I regret that I was betrayed," I said, "but I don't regret choosing myself." He nodded. "Good, because I don't regret choosing you either." For the first time, I believed him completely. Just when I thought the past had finished testing me, it returned, wearing my sister's face. My mother called me one morning. Her voice was shaky. "Samra's here. She wants to see you." I felt my chest tighten. I hadn't spoken to Samra since the day I told her to leave my room. A part of me wanted to refuse, but another part knew that unfinished stories have a way of lingering. "I'll come," I said. When I arrived at my parents' house, Samra was sitting on the sofa where we used to braid each other's hair as children. She looked different, smaller, less certain. The confident woman who once filled every room now sat hunched, twisting a handkerchief in her fingers. She stood when she saw me. "Laila." I waited, let her speak first. "I lost him," she said. "Ayan left. He said he couldn't trust me anymore." I raised an eyebrow. "I wonder why." She flinched. "I know I deserve that. I know I hurt you. I came to ask, not for forgiveness, just to tell you that I understand now what I did to you." I studied her face. There was no manipulation in her eyes this time, just exhaustion. "Why come now?" I asked. "Because I have no one," she whispered, and I realized the only person who ever loved me without conditions was you. Silence sat between us, heavy, fragile. My mother watched from the doorway. My father looked away, giving us privacy. I thought about all our childhood memories, the shared room, the secrets, the whispered dreams, the moment she stood between me and school bullies, the night she held me when I had my first heartbreak. Then I thought about the bedroom door, the betrayal, the man in her arms. Forgiveness is not something that arrives like magic. It is built, brick by brick, choice by choice. I sat down across from her. "You broke something in me, something that took a long time to rebuild." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I know." "I cannot pretend it never happened," I continued, "and I cannot be the sister I once was. That innocence is gone." She nodded, biting her lip. "But," I said, "I also refuse to carry hatred for the rest of my life." She looked up, hope flickering. "So this is what I can offer," I said. "We start again, slowly, with boundaries, with honesty. No secrets, no competition. If you accept that, we can try." Samra sobbed, not from drama, from relief. "I accept," she whispered. We didn't hug yet, not yet, but we sat there, two sisters, broken, rebuilding. When I returned home, Fareed opened the door and immediately saw the tiredness in my eyes. "She came," I said. He nodded, poured me tea, sat beside me, and waited. I told him everything, every word, every tear. When I finished, he said, "Whatever you choose, I'll support you." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "I think that's how I know this is real. You don't control my choices. You stand beside them." He kissed my forehead. A few weeks later, Samra started therapy. My parents supported her. I met her for tea sometimes. Slowly, carefully, trust built in small doses. Then, one evening, Fareed came home with flowers. "Just because," he said. I smiled. "You're becoming romantic in your old age." He laughed. "Maybe you're rubbing off on me." We sat together on the couch, petals scattered on the table, tea warming our hands. And in that moment, I realized something profound. My story was never just about revenge. Revenge had been the spark, the fire that pushed me out of collapse. But what came after, rebuilding, self-respect, unexpected love, forgiveness, that was the real victory. I had walked through betrayal and come out whole, not untouched, but stronger, wiser, free. And as I looked at the man beside me, the man who had stood in the middle of a family storm and chosen peace, I knew something with certainty. I didn't just survive my sister's betrayal. I transformed because of it. Life settled into a rhythm that felt earned rather than accidental. The kind of peace you don't notice at first because you're too busy surviving to imagine it. But one morning, as I watered the plants on our balcony and watched Fareed reading the newspaper with his glasses slipping slightly down his nose, I realized something quietly miraculous. I was happy. Not the fragile happiness that depends on someone else's loyalty, not the nervous happiness that fears loss at every corner. This was steady, rooted, mine. Fareed and I had been married for 2 years when he brought up the idea of children. We were having dinner, sharing a simple meal of lentils and rice, when he said, "Have you thought about having a family?" My spoon paused midair. A family. The word once carried a sharp taste, blood ties that could betray, love that could wound. But now, sitting across from a man who had never once lied to me, never once raised his voice at me, never once treated me as disposable, the word felt different. "I've thought about it," I said carefully, "but I was afraid to want it." He nodded. "I understand." There was no pressure, no demand, just possibility. 6 months later, when the pregnancy test showed 2 faint lines, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried, not out of fear, but out of gratitude for the chance to build something new, something clean. When I told Fareed, he stared at the test for a long moment, then looked at me with soft eyes. "We'll be good parents," he said, "not perfect, but honest." And that was enough. Pregnancy brought its own challenges, nausea, back pain, sleepless nights. But Fareed was always there, holding my hair, rubbing my feet, bringing me water without being asked. Each small act stitched trust deeper into my bones. When our daughter was born, tiny and red-faced and screaming at the world, Fareed placed her in my arms and whispered, "She has your eyes." In that moment, everything, the betrayal, the revenge, the chaos, felt like a distant storm that had passed. But storms have a way of returning when you least expect them. Our daughter was 3 months old when Samara called. Her voice was shaky. "Can I come see you?" I hesitated. Our relationship had been careful, controlled, limited. Tea meetings, polite conversations, no deep intimacy, no sisterly closeness. We were rebuilding, but slowly. "All right," I said. "Come." She arrived carrying a small stuffed bear. She looked healthier. Therapy had softened her sharp edges, but sadness still lived behind her smile. We sat in the living room. She handed me the bear for the baby. I thanked her, then waited. She took a breath. "I'm leaving the city. I got a job in another province, a fresh start." I nodded. "That's good." She looked at my daughter sleeping in my arms. "I wish I could go back, not to him, to us, to before I broke everything." Her voice cracked. I adjusted my daughter carefully, then said, "We can't go back." Samra wiped her tears. "I know, but before I leave, I wanted to say I'm sorry again, without excuses, without hoping for anything in return." I studied her, the sister who once had everything, beauty, confidence, attention, and who lost it all by betraying the one person who would have stood by her through anything. "Thank you," I said, "for saying it honestly." She nodded. Then she stood. At the door, she turned back. "Laila?" "Yes?" "You won," she said softly. I shook my head. "No, Samra, I survived. There's a difference." She smiled sadly and left. That night, as I rocked my daughter to sleep, I thought about how easily my life could have collapsed, how close I had come to being a woman who never trusted again, who never loved again, who never believed in family again. Revenge had been my first instinct, my armor, my way of refusing to be destroyed. But it was not the end of my story. The end was here, in a quiet room, with a child in my arms, a husband in the next room humming while washing dishes, a heart no longer ruled by bitterness. One evening, years later, my daughter sat beside me on the couch and asked, "Mama, how did you and Baba meet?" I smiled. "That," I said, "is a long story." She grinned. "I want to hear it." I looked at Fareed. He raised his eyebrows, amused. I shook my head slightly. "Maybe one day," I said, "when you're old enough to understand." Because some stories are not for children. Some stories are carved by pain, and they teach lessons meant for adults. That night, as I turned off the lights and slipped into bed beside Fareed, he whispered, "You're thinking again." I smiled in the dark, just grateful. He took my hand. "Me too." And in the silence, I understood something that took years to earn. Betrayal may have written the first chapter of my transformation, but love, steady, quiet, chosen love, wrote the ending. And I lived. Time has a way of smoothing even the sharpest edges. Years passed, and the story that once felt like an open wound slowly turned into a scar, visible, permanent, but no longer painful to touch. My daughter, Amina, grew quickly. She had Fareed's quiet, observant nature and my stubborn refusal to be small. She spoke early, asked endless questions, and watched everything with bright, curious eyes. Motherhood changed me in ways I never expected. It softened some of my hard edges, reminded me to be gentle, to be patient, to love without fear. Fareed remained my constant. He never used my past against me, never threw my choices in my face. We built a home where honesty was the foundation, not loyalty forced by blood or expectation. Our house became a calm place. Warm meals, bedtime stories, shared jokes, peaceful arguments that ended in laughter instead of slammed doors. But peace doesn't mean the world stops testing you. When Amina turned 5, she started school. One afternoon, she came home unusually quiet. She sat at the table while I poured her juice. "Mama," she said softly, "why don't we see Uncle Ayan?" The glass paused in my hand. "Who told you about Uncle Ayan?" I asked. She shrugged. "Grandma said Baba has a brother who lives alone. She said families should stick together." Of course, my mother-in-law, the woman who still struggled to accept how everything unfolded. She never blamed me openly, but her eyes sometimes held a question she never asked. I sat beside my daughter. "Uncle Ayan made some choices that hurt people," I said carefully. "Sometimes when adults hurt each other, they need space." Amina thought about this. "Is he bad?" I shook my head. "No, he's human. Humans make mistakes." She accepted the answer easily because children trust love more than history. But the question stirred something inside me. That night, Fareed and I talked. Amina is getting older, Fareed said. She'll ask more questions about Ayan, about Samra, about us. I nodded. I know. We can't hide the past forever, but we can decide how we tell it. We agreed to be honest, in age-appropriate pieces. No lies, no sugarcoating, no bitterness passed down like inheritance. A few months later, Ayan appeared again. This time not at our door, at my parents' house. My mother called me. "He wants to see you," she said, just once. I hesitated, not out of fear, out of uncertainty. What did he want now? Forgiveness? Closure? Absolution? Curiosity won. I went. He looked older. The boyish charm that once attracted me had faded into tired eyes and a careful smile. He stood when I entered, hand slightly shaking. "Thank you for coming," he said. I sat across from him. My parents quietly left the room. We sat in silence for a while. Then he spoke. "I lost everything," he said. "Samra left. My job fell apart. I spent years blaming you, blaming Fareed, blaming everyone but myself." I listened, calm, detached. "But therapy," he continued, "forced me to face the truth. I broke my own life. I betrayed you. I betrayed my brother. No punishment anyone gave me was worse than living with myself." He looked at me. "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just needed to say I'm sorry, without excuses." I studied him, the man who once shattered me, and realized something strange. I no longer needed anything from him. Not apology, not guilt, not acknowledgement. My healing was not tied to his regret. But his apology still mattered. "Thank you," I said, "for saying it honestly." He nodded, his eyes wet. "I want to be in my brother's life again someday, and maybe in your daughter's life, if you allow it." I thought about Amina, about her innocent question, about not passing hatred to the next generation. "One step at a time," I said. "Start by rebuilding trust with Fareed." He agreed. When I told Fareed later, he exhaled slowly. I've waited a long time to hear those words from him, not for revenge, for peace. Months later, Ayan and Fareed met, not as close brothers, but as men willing to rebuild something broken. Awkward dinners, short conversations, slow progress. One evening, Ayan gave Amina a coloring book. She accepted it happily. No past, no pain, just a child meeting an uncle. And in that moment, I saw how cycles could end, how bitterness didn't have to be inherited. Meanwhile, Samra stayed in another province. We spoke occasionally, simple messages, birthday wishes, updates about life. No sisterly closeness, but no hostility either. Just two women who accepted that love can be lost and still respected. One day, Amina asked, "Mama, do you have a sister?" I paused. "Yes, her name is Samra." "Why don't we see her?" "Because sometimes adults need distance to grow, but she loves you, even from far away." Amina smiled. "Maybe one day I'll meet her." "Maybe," I said. That night, as I tucked her to bed, she asked, "Mama, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. I sat beside her. "Yes, sweetheart, I am." She yawned. "Good, because Baba says you're the bravest person he knows." I laughed softly. "He's very kind." But after she fell asleep, I lay beside Fareed and thought about bravery. I hadn't felt brave walking into that bedroom years ago. I hadn't felt brave planning my next steps. I simply refused to disappear. Sometimes revenge looks like survival. Sometimes revenge evolves into reinvention. And sometimes reinvention becomes peace. Fareed reached for my hand.
"Long day?" he asked. I smiled. "Long life." He chuckled. "We earned it." And as I drifted to sleep, I knew there was nothing left unresolved, no loose ends pulling at my heart, no unfinished conversations haunting my thoughts. Just gratitude for pain that forced growth, for love that grew from unlikely soil, for a life rebuilt, not repaired.
There's a quiet moment that comes in every long journey, a moment where you realize the story has already reached its destination, even if life keeps moving forward. For me, that moment came on Amina's 10th birthday. We had a small gathering in the garden, balloons tied to chairs, a homemade cake, Fareed grilling skewers while Amina ran around with her school friends. Laughter filled the air, the kind of laughter I once thought I would never hear again in my life. As I carried a tray of drinks outside, I saw Fareed kneeling to tie Amina's shoelace. The way he looked at her, with patience, pride, and softness, made my chest ache with gratitude. And in that instant, a memory flashed. The bedroom door, the laughter that wasn't meant for me, the betrayal. It felt like another lifetime. Later that evening, after guests left and the house settled into a comfortable quiet, Fareed and I sat on the balcony. Amina slept inside, exhausted from sugar and excitement. Fareed handed me tea. "You're smiling?" I said, "I'm remembering." He raised an eyebrow. "Good memories or bad ones?" "Both," I said, "because without the worst day of my life, I wouldn't be sitting here today." He nodded slowly. Life has strange ways. We sat in silence, watching the stars. After a while, Fareed said, "Do you ever want to tell your story to someone outside this house?" I looked at him. "Why?" "Because there are women out there sitting on their bedroom floors right now, thinking their lives are over. Maybe hearing yours would help." His words settled in my heart. That night, I opened a notebook and began to write. Not for revenge, not for validation, but for release and for others. I wrote about the betrayal, the shock, the planning, the unexpected partnership, the slow rebuilding, the forgiveness, the peace. Page after page, tear after tear, but also laughter, gratitude, reflection. Months later, I shared my story at a small women's support group. My voice shook at first, then steadied. Women nodded, some cried, some smiled, some hugged me afterward and whispered, "Thank you, I needed this." That was the moment I realized pain becomes purpose when you refuse to let it poison you. Years rolled forward. Amina grew taller than me. She became outspoken, bold, compassionate, a mirror of who I might have been if life had not broken and remade me. One evening, as she packed for university, she sat on my bed. "Mama," she said, "you always tell me to choose myself, to never stay where I'm not respected. Why is that so important to you?" I sat beside her, smoothed her hair. "Because," I said, "once in my life, I didn't choose myself, and I paid a heavy price." She looked curious. "Was it before Baba?" I nodded. "Did someone hurt you?" I took a breath. It was time. Not all details, but truth. "I was going to marry someone else once, and he betrayed me with someone I trusted." Her eyes widened. "That's horrible." "Yes," I said, "but it led me to your father and to you, so I don't regret where I am. I only learned to never accept less than respect." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad you chose yourself. Otherwise, I wouldn't exist." I laughed softly. "That's very true." The day she left for university, Fareed and I watched her taxi disappear down the street. "Our baby grew up," he said. I squeezed his hand. "And we grew with her." That evening, we walked through our quiet house, now echoing with the absence of a child's laughter. "Do you feel old?" Fareed asked playfully. "Not old," I said. "Complete." He looked at me. "Even with how our story began?" "Especially because of how it began, because it taught me who I am." He kissed my forehead. Years later, on a rainy afternoon, Amina came home for a visit. She sat at the kitchen table with a serious expression. "Mama," she said, "I met someone." My heart skipped. "He's kind," she continued, "but I want to be sure. How did you know Baba was the one?" I smiled. "I didn't know at first. Love doesn't always arrive as fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as peace." She considered this. "I want that." "You deserve that," I said. And as I watched my daughter navigate her own adult life, I realized something that made me smile. My story had come full circle. The betrayal that once threatened to destroy me became the lesson that saved my daughter from repeating my pain. If that isn't victory, I don't know what is. There's something strange about reaching the quiet after a long storm. You spend years bracing for thunder, for lightning, for sudden heartbreak. And then one day, you realize the sky has been clear for a long time. You just didn't notice because you were busy living. After Amina left for university, Fareed and I found ourselves alone again, like newlyweds who already knew each other's flaws and still chose each other every day. We traveled more, small trips at first, nearby cities, then farther places, walking through unfamiliar streets hand in hand, sharing street food, getting lost on purpose. It felt like discovering each other again, without the weight of revenge, betrayal, or family drama pressing on our shoulders. One evening in a quiet hotel room, Fareed looked at me and said, "Do you remember the cafe where we first met after everything happened?" I smiled softly. How could I forget? "You walked in with the eyes of someone who had nothing left to lose," he said, "and still asked for justice, not destruction." I laughed softly. "I don't know if I was that noble." He shook his head. "You were. You never tried to ruin me, even though you could have. You never used me as a weapon. We chose to build something real." His words warmed me in a way no revenge ever could. Back home, life continued in gentle rhythms. We visited Amina at university, met her boyfriend, a respectful, nervous young man who held the door open and listened more than he spoke. Fareed gave him advice. I watched quietly, remembering another young man once sitting nervously across from my parents. But this time, there was no unease in my chest, only trust. One afternoon, as Fareed and I walked through a park, we saw a young woman sitting alone on a bench crying into her phone. She reminded me of myself all those years ago, broken, shocked, confused. Without thinking, I walked over, offered her a tissue, and asked if she was all right. She told me in pieces that she had just discovered her fiancé was cheating with her cousin. The coincidence struck me so hard I almost laughed. Instead, I sat beside her and listened, really listened. No judgment, no empty comfort. Before leaving, I told her one sentence: "Your life isn't over, it's just changing shape." She held my hand tightly, like someone clinging to a rope in a storm. As Fareed and I walked away, he squeezed my hand. "You see," he said, "your story lives beyond you." Years later, when I retired from work, I began mentoring women who had survived betrayal and emotional trauma. I didn't give them instructions. I just shared my journey, my mistakes, my growth, my healing. Some chose revenge, some chose forgiveness, some chose to walk away quietly. Every story was different, but the lesson was the same. You are not defined by what was done to you. You are defined by what you choose next. One evening, Samra called. It had been years since we last spoke. "Laila," she said, "I heard about your work helping women. I wanted to tell you, I'm proud of you." I smiled softly. "Thank you. I don't expect anything from you, I want you to know, but losing you was the greatest lesson of my life." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I hope you found peace," I said. "I'm trying," she replied. We hung up. No drama, no reopening of wounds, just two women acknowledging the distance that once broke them, now healed by acceptance. One rainy evening, as Fareed and I sat on the balcony watching water drip from the roof, he asked, "If you could go back and change that day, would you?" The question hung in the air. I thought about the bedroom door, the betrayal, the pain, the nights I couldn't breathe from grief, the fury, the plan, the unexpected proposal, the quiet wedding, the daughter, the life. I shook my head. "No," I said, "because then I wouldn't be who I am, and I like who I became." He smiled. "I like her, too." And as he wrapped his arm around me, I leaned into him, feeling safe, complete, and whole. Some stories end with weddings, some end with revenge. Mine ended with peace, and that was the greatest victory of all. Peace is not a dramatic thing. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or grand speeches. It arrives quietly, like soft rain after a drought. And once you have it, you guard it with everything you are. Fareed and I settled into a life that felt steady. Not perfect, no life ever is, but honest, warm, predictable in the best way. We argued sometimes about silly things, whether the kitchen window should stay open at night, whether we needed another rug in the living room, whether Fareed had spent too much on his new gardening tools. But even in disagreement, there was safety. No fear of betrayal lurking under everyday moments. No secret phones, no double lives. One afternoon, Amina came home from university unexpectedly. She walked through the front door, dropped her bag, and threw her arms around me. "Ami," she whispered, "I think I'm in love." I laughed, brushing her hair back. "Sit, tell me everything." She spoke for hours about her boyfriend, about her fears, about marriage, about trust. And as I listened, I realized something powerful. My daughter had no idea what storms I had walked through to give her this calm. She didn't need to know every detail because she was growing in soil that no longer carried poison. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, lights dim, tea cooling in my hands, and memories washed over me. Not with pain this time, but with gratitude, because I had survived, I had rebuilt, I had chosen love again, even when I had every reason not to. The next day, I received a message from a woman I had mentored. She wrote, "I left my cheating husband today. I was terrified, but I remembered your story. I chose myself." I stared at the message for a long time, tears blurring the words. My revenge had never been about destruction. It had been about rewriting destiny. And now that rewrite was rippling into other lives. One weekend, Fareed suggested we visit his parents. They lived in a modest house with a garden that always smelled of mint and jasmine. His mother greeted me warmly, placing her hands on my cheeks. "You are glowing," she said. "I'm just happy," I replied. During dinner, his father cleared his throat. "I know how your marriage began, and I know how much pain was behind it. But I want you to know something. You gave my son a life of honesty, and you gave us a granddaughter who fills this house with laughter. We are grateful." I swallowed hard, emotion tightening my chest. Sometimes the family you gain becomes the balm for the family that once broke you. On the drive home, Fareed reached over and held my hand. "You realize our story could have gone very differently." I nodded. "Every day." He smiled. "But here we are." Here we were. Years passed. Amina graduated, she got engaged, and when she told us, I felt a flicker of old fear, the kind that whispers, "What if history repeats itself?" But then I looked at her, confident, aware, open-eyed, not naive like I once was. She had grown up watching a woman rebuild herself from ashes, and that had shaped her. At her wedding, as she walked down the aisle, I felt Fareed squeeze my hand. "You did this. You broke a cycle." I shook my head softly. We did. After the wedding, while guests danced and music filled the hall, I stepped outside for air. Cool night wind brushed my face. Stars glimmered above me. I thought of the girl I once was, the one who believed love meant blind trust, the one who thought betrayal was the end of the world. If I could speak to her now, I would tell her, this pain will shape you, not shatter you. Footsteps approached. Fareed joined me, wrapping his jacket around my shoulders. You okay? He asked. I leaned into him. I'm more than okay. Later that night, lying in bed, I realized something else. Revenge had been the spark, but healing had been the real journey. Marrying Fareed started as a response to betrayal, but over time it became something independent of Samra, independent of my ex, independent of the past. It became love chosen freely. One rainy morning, I opened an old box in the closet. Inside were photographs from my first engagement, letters, a dried bouquet, symbols of a life that never happened. I held them for a moment. Then I threw them away. Not in anger, not in sorrow, but in release. When Fareed came home later, he found me making tea. You look lighter, he said. I am, I replied. He smiled knowingly and kissed my forehead. Sometimes closure isn't a conversation, it's a quiet decision. And as the years continued, filled with birthdays, family dinners, travel photos, laughter, and peaceful mornings, I understood that my story had come full circle. Betrayal introduced the storm. Revenge changed the direction. Love rewrote the ending, and peace became the legacy. There comes a point in life when you stop telling your story with anger and start telling it with wisdom. I didn't notice exactly when that shift happened. Maybe it was the first time I comforted another woman in pain. Maybe it was the day I watched my daughter walk down the aisle. Or maybe it was simply the morning I woke up and realized the past no longer hurt when I remembered it. Fareed and I grew older together in quiet contentment. Our hair streaked with gray, our laughter softer, deeper, our love no longer fiery and new, but steady like a lighthouse that had weathered many storms. On our 20th anniversary, Fareed planned a surprise. He took me back to the small cafe where we first met after my betrayal. It looked almost the same. Same chipped cups, same smell of cardamom tea, same corner table. We sat there, hands intertwined, and for a moment I saw us as we once were. Two wounded people choosing something bold, something uncertain. I was terrified that day, Fareed admitted. Not of you, of the future. I smiled. I was terrified too. And yet, he said, lifting his teacup, here we are. We toasted. Not to revenge, not to pain, but to courage. When we returned home, Amina had left a voice message. Ami, Abu, happy anniversary. You taught me what real love looks like. Not perfect love, but honest love. I played the message twice, heart swelling. That night, I sat at my desk and began writing. Not a book, not for publication, just letters. Letters to the version of me who had once sat on the bedroom floor staring at betrayal through an open door. I wrote, You will think your life is over. It is not. You will feel humiliated. You will rise. You will plan revenge, but the revenge will not be what you think. It will be survival. It will be growth. It will be love again. Hold on. I sealed the letter and placed it in a drawer. In the following years, my mentoring work expanded. Women from different cities wrote to me. Some recognized pieces of their own lives in mine. Some just needed to know they weren't alone. One woman asked me, if you could give one piece of advice to someone betrayed by family, what would it be? I answered without hesitation, don't let their betrayal decide your ending. Because that was the core truth of my story. My sister's betrayal had been devastating, but it did not define my final chapter. Time passed. Fariz was tired. We spent mornings watering plants together, afternoons reading, evenings walking slowly through the neighborhood, greeting neighbors who had watched our daughter grow. One day, Fareed stumbled slightly on the steps. Nothing serious, just age reminding us that bodies don't stay young forever. That night, as he slept beside me, I realized another truth. Our story had begun with a shocking twist, but it had matured into something very simple. Two people choosing each other every day. No drama, no secrets, no triangles, just presence. I turned off the lamp and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." Not to the betrayal, not to the pain, but to the resilience that had carried me through. Years later, when my hair was fully silver and my hands dotted with age spots, I sat with my granddaughter on my lap. She played with my rings, curious. "Dottie," she asked, "how did you meet Dada?" I smiled. "That," I said softly, "is a long story." She leaned against my chest, ready to listen. And as I began to tell a gentle, age-appropriate version of it, I realized something profound. Stories are not just about what happened to us, they are about what we pass on. I did not pass on bitterness. I did not pass on distrust. I passed on truth, strength, and hope. And that was my real revenge. Not marrying his brother, not shocking the family, not proving anything to my sister, but building a life so full, so warm, so honest that the past became only a footnote. As my granddaughter's eyes slowly closed in sleep, I held her close, heart peaceful. The girl who once cried on the floor had become the woman who rocked new generations into safety. And that was the ending I chose. Before I close this story, I want you to picture something simple. A quiet house, morning sunlight slipping through thin curtains, the smell of tea, the soft sound of someone you love moving around in the kitchen. No shouting, no secrets, no hidden phones, no locked doors, just peace. That is where my life ended up. Not in the bedroom where my heart broke, not in the living room where families argued, not in the wedding hall where whispers followed me, but here, in ordinary mornings, in calm evenings, in love that chose truth over fantasy. When Fareed passed away, it was gentle, expected, age doing what age does. He held my hand until the very last breath, and even in grief, I felt gratitude, because some people live their whole lives never knowing safe love. I had known it deeply. At his funeral, people spoke of his kindness, his honesty, his steady nature. I listened quietly, and inside I whispered, "You saved me too." Afterward, life slowed. Amina visited often. My granddaughter filled the house with giggles, and in quiet moments I would sit by the window with tea, watching the world move. One day, Amina asked me, "Ami, do you ever regret how everything happened?" I thought for a long moment. "If you ask me whether I regret the betrayal," I said, "of course I do. No one deserves that pain. But if you ask me whether I regret the life I built afterward, no, never." She nodded, eyes shining. "You're the strongest woman I know." I smiled. Strength is not never breaking. Strength is rebuilding. As years passed, my mentoring group continued. Younger women took over organizing it. They didn't need me as much anymore. That was a good thing. It meant the cycle was healing. On my 70th birthday, they surprised me with a small gathering. Women from different walks of life, different stories, different scars, all smiling, all standing taller than when they first arrived. One of them raised a glass and said, "Because one woman refused to let betrayal define her." Tears filled my eyes, because that was the moral of it all. You cannot control what people do to you, but you can choose what you become afterward. And so, if you are listening to my story today, sitting in your own quiet pain, feeling betrayed, humiliated, lost, hear this from someone who walked through fire. Your story is not over. Your ending is not written yet. You may think revenge will heal you, but true victory is not in hurting them back. True victory is building a life so full, so meaningful, so peaceful that one day you look back and say, "They tried to break me, but I became more." This is Laila, and this was my story.